Marvel and DC Comics have been on the receiving end of a lot of black eyes lately. If you remember a while back, in the span of like 3 weeks, DC lost their Batman writer and Marvel lost their ASM writer and their X-Men writer all to Substack, a company that had literally never created their own comic book. They decided they were going to get into the comic book space, and the best writers on the best books at Marvel and DC just up and went, yeah, I'd rather take that job. That didn't look very good for Marvel and DC Comics. Certainly, over the years, Alan Moore has painted a less than flattering picture of working with DC Comics. Bill Willingham decided to put Fables into public domain, saying, I don't want to negotiate or work with DC Comics anymore. I would rather take my creator-owned property and just put it in the public domain. Other people can create Fables. I already have to get the money back that they currently owe me, and I don't want to have to deal with this anymore. It doesn't sound like a lot of good creators are just itching, just jonesing to go work for Marvel and DC Comics anymore. That used to be the destination if you were a comic book writer. The destination was to be the ongoing Batman writer. The destination was to be the ongoing Superman writer. The destination was to be the ongoing ASM writer. The destination was to be the ongoing X-Men writer. And that is not the case anymore. And it seems like we're kind of getting to a place where it's not even like a bump on the road anymore. You don't go in there and be like, well, I want to get my time on Batman to kind of establish my name, and then I'm going to go concentrate on creator-owned stuff. You know, maybe a couple years on X-Men, really get some good stories in there, get the enthusiasm for me as a creator, and then really go do the stuff I want to do. It sounds like a lot of the really good creators are just passing it by and saying, you know what? That is not exactly the opportunity that I would like. And I do not blame the creators for this. I do not think that they're doing the wrong thing for themselves, but I do think overall this is harmful for the comic book industry. We recently had Mark Miller on the Comics Aficionados, and he talked about he really wants to go out there and find the best creators that are available, that people love, bring them back to comic books for at least a 2-year stint, and do something at Marvel and DC just to get some enthusiasm back, to get some people behind Marvel and DC and their storytelling again, because it's good for everybody. It's good for Marvel, obviously. It's good for DC, obviously. But it's good for Image. It's good for Boom. It's good for creator-owned books. In fact, in the long run, it's probably good for crowdfunding comics and stuff like that, to build up some new names, to actually reinvigorate people's interest in comic books and start looking for new stuff to buy, rather than what's the new thing on the Shonen Jump app, which is kind of the place that we are right now. Recently, Rick Remender had some things to say. We'll talk about his big announcement, and then also the little thing that he said underneath that spoke volumes about the state of Marvel and DC Comics. Rick Remender, the best-selling comics author behind successful runs of Marvel's Avengers and X-Force, has signed a 3-year exclusive contract with Image Comics. Remender already has a long history with Image, which has served as the publisher for his Giant Generator imprint since 2013. The exclusive contract will give Remender freedom to continue releasing new series under the publisher, which already includes Deadly Class, Black Science, and Low. The announcement also brings news of a second printing of Remender's wildly successful series, The Sacrificers. As you likely know, I have a love-hate relationship with Rick Remender. When Rick Remender is on, he's absolutely brilliant. He's one of my favorite comic book writers in the industry today. When he's really going after it with a story and characters that are in my wheelhouse, he absolutely seems to nail everything. And then when he's doing something that really isn't my wheelhouse, he kind of turns me off. The best example I can think of is Scumbag. If you ever read that comic book, it turns out that is not in Wes's wheelhouse. And that actually turned me off to Rick Remender for a while. I was like, I don't know if I want to read this guy's comic books anymore. But if you go back to his X-Force run, absolutely brilliant stuff. If you go read Deadly Class, very cool. If you go read Black Science, pretty cool stuff. Low is also very cool. So he's had these really big successes, and it feels like, you know, he's really reignited interest in his work with the Sacrificers. It's probably, you know, I understand that there's only been 2 issues so far that have come out on the market, but they are so good, and the story that they're setting up is so cool that I cannot see it not being in like my top 3 comic books for the entire year of 2023, competing up there with like Big Game and Batman, Superman, World's Finest and stuff like that. That's how good Sacrificers really is, and it is Rick Remender at his best. And there is a part of me that wishes Rick Remender at his best wasn't working on Sacrificers. There's a part of me that wishes he was working on characters that I really like and invest in, like a Hal Jordan, like a Nightwing, Nightcrawler, anything like that, that could help really reestablish Marvel and DC in the eyes of fans, and being able to trust them that they're going to tell good stories. because Rick Remender does take a lot of chances. I'll give him that. But when he's working with established characters, he always pays respect to that. The best example I do have is Uncanny X-Force, which I think is brilliant. In my opinion, that's the best version of Deadpool we've ever gotten in comic books. Yes, he's irreverent. Yes, there's a humorous element to the character, and I think it's played off beautifully. That works for Deadpool. But when he's serious, or when he needs to be serious, or when he needs to be dangerous, like, he comes off as very dangerous. And I was like, man, this is the Deadpool that new writers on the character should be looking to make Deadpool really important. Now he's just like a joke and everything. But it turns out Rick Remender had those opportunities and turned them down. Remender spoke about why he chose to sign the exclusive deal with Image, despite receiving offers from both DC Comics and Marvel to write some of the most well-known properties. He said, "I've recently turned down very generous offers to write X-Men and Batman. And while flattered, that would ultimately be a step backwards artistically and not where my heart is at." There was a time when you got on X-Men or Batman, they had to kick you off the book. They had to forcibly remove writers from the properties because those were the coolest jobs. Those were the best jobs in all of comic books. And I think Marvel and DC really have not kept up with the times, and they haven't made it worth the while of the very best creators in the industry to come on these properties and tell the best stories possible. A lot of these writers understand Marvel and DC need them more than they need Marvel and DC. Marvel and DC need the best writers on Batman, the best writers on X-Men to create new stories, to create new lore, to create new things to build off of and really build these things out in other mediums. But they never really changed their contracts. They're really still screwing a lot of these creators over. They're not saying, hey, if your story gets adapted into a movie, we're going to pay you X amount. Or, hey, we'll give you a % of the gross or something like that. You know, in Marvel's case, a lot of the times you hear, you know, Jim Starlin, the Infinity Gauntlet basically is the backbone to what they did with Infinity War and Endgame. Two of the most wildly successful movies in the history of the industry. Now, obviously, Infinity Gauntlet didn't play out in Infinity War and Endgame exactly how Jim Starlin created it, but you can clearly see how much his story inspired a lot of it. You know, when you hear the thing where he got like tickets to the premiere with a plane ticket and a couple $1,000s, now he ended up getting more because he was very mad about it. But the fact that they ever thought that that would be enough to thank the guy for creating something that literally generated for them like over $5 billion in the box office is absolutely insane. Once you see what happened to Jim Starlin, why would you even want to work for Marvel and DC on their best properties and give them all your best stories so they can go make a ton of money in all these other medias, but never actually compensate you for your own creativity? So you see this trend where the best writers are not taking the opportunity to write Batman. They're not taking the opportunity to write X-Men. They're dropping off of Batman with virtually no notice to go write creator-owned stuff on Substack just because there are some guarantees there. They're dropping an ASM run that it felt like was redeeming their career in the case of Nick Spencer to go work for Substack, which certainly wasn't going to build his name out in the credibility of most comic book readers, but there was some stability there. And Marvel and DC have got to catch up to the times unless they want all these characters to just fall by the wayside, because you can't keep putting really mediocre, non-talented writers on these characters, because eventually you are going to run out of the stuff that will translate well to movies and television and everything, and there will be no more source material to mine, and then they're going to go back in time and making movies based on the name of the character rather than what the character stands for. And you can already see at Marvel, they're running out of ideas. They need people like Rick Remender on X-Men, on Spider-Man, on Wolverine, on some of these really important things. They need an Ed Brubaker, who also has an exclusive contract with Image Comics. They need Ed Brubaker on Batman. They need Ed Brubaker on some of these characters, because don't forget, he's the guy that did Captain America the Winter Soldier and created so much lore that not only fueled an exceptionally profitable movie, but so many of those elements just live on today from what Ed Brubaker was able to do in his Captain America run. And we're not getting that right now. And I think a lot of these creators are absolutely gun shy to give any of their good ideas to Marvel or DC, because they know that they're never going to profit off them properly. They'll never get the respect. They'll never get their just due from the studios themselves. So it's better to just go do your creator-owned stuff and hope that maybe one of your ideas takes off. Maybe two of your ideas take off, and then you get to be Mark Miller at Netflix, where you're calling the shots and you're developing your own properties for a streamer and you're actually compensated fairly for your own creativity. And Marvel and DC have put themselves in this terrible place because they need guys like Rick Remender. Yes, he does take chances and sometimes he goes too far, but listen to what he had to say when he was talking about this. Remender also spoke about Giant Generator's ethos for creating enjoyable stories. We approach each book as an opportunity to tell a story we desperately care about telling by doing the hard work of ensuring a substantive reading experience worthy of fans' time and investment. How many creators at Marvel and DC Comics today can you honestly say that about? Care about the fan experience. These are stories they're desperate to get out there, to actually go out there and tell in the best storytelling medium in the world. And it's his top priority to make sure that that story is worth your time and money. Nobody seems to be doing that for the most part at DC and Comics. Yes, there are a few anomalies here and there, but it almost feels like the customer experience, the customer satisfaction is the least important thing in the room. There's a reason guys like Rick Remender and Ed Brubaker are the best writers of their generation, because they actually give a shit. They care about the craft. They care about the medium. Maybe they don't think exactly about the characters the way that you and I do, but you can't read a Rick Remender comic book and come away going, yeah, he just phoned that one in. And there's so much stuff being phoned in nowadays that DC and Marvel have got to rethink the way that they're doing business to actually give these people a reason to come back. And I hope and I'm praying that Mark Millar is successful in bringing a lot of these big names back and relighting a fire under Marvel and DC Comics, you know, not only as a fan, but as somebody in the comic book industry. I have a comic book YouTube channel, but none of us are ever going to grow and make more money as long as they keep phoning it in and never give the best creators in the industry a reason to come back and tell their best stories with the best heroes in the history of the world. Old school comic book fans are ready to come back. They want to come back. They want to read Batman. They want to read Superman. They want to read X-Men. They want to read Spider-Man. There's a reason they turn their back on these characters. This is not because they don't love them anymore. It's because the publishers stopped loving them. It's because the creators stopped respecting them. Had a really good conversation with my buddy Eric Breen, kind of talking about why old school fans walked away. And trust me, guys like this want to come back. There's also a link in the video description.